Welcome to this Bible study series by the Church of God Seventh-day South Africa. We're busy with a series on the Ten Commandments, and we are just asking our question that do we find evidence of all the commandments being valid and mentioned in the New Testament? We know from many scriptures that the Ten Commandments is still valid, but let's just go through this exercise and one by one look at every commandment and see it in the New Testament. So we're now looking at the sixth commandment, and we're going to see how that is explained in the New Testament. If we start in Exodus 20 and verse 13, Exodus 20 and verse 13, it gives us the sixth commandment. And it says, you shall not murder. That's the sixth commandment. You shall not murder. So we shall value life above everything else. And we will never get angry, we will never plan, we will never think of murdering people. Now, it does exclude the issue of the death penalty, as I'll show later on, but in general we should value life above everything else, and we should do everything we can to nourish life, to protect life. And so let's look at Romans 1 and verse 29. If we look at Romans 1 and verse 29, here Paul talked to the Romans, that's Gentiles in a Gentile church, but Christians in a Gentile country, and it says in Romans 1 verse 28 and 29, and it deals with all the sin of the general population. And he says, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, and full of envy and murder. So that is a very negative thing, and Paul obviously talked to them about these wrong things. These are all things that define sin. So murder is there in the New Testament, definitely. And if we turn further to Romans 13 verse 9, the Apostle Paul explains further, and I hope you note these scriptures and look at them and think again, these are New Testament scriptures. In Romans 13 and verse 9, he says, for the commandments that says, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, and you shall not bear false witness, and you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandments, are all summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So, if we concentrate on good thoughts, if we concentrate on good and right relationships with our neighbors and with other people, then the spirit of murder should not be in our heart. That's the main thing. But if you come to the point where you are going to transgress a commandment, then you must know that you no longer have the love of your neighbor in your heart. So we should not even get close to that point. If we look at James 2 and verse 11. In James 2 and verse 11. James 2 and 11, James writes also to the church out there, and he says, for he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. So again, we can see the commandments are valid, and it's on the mind of the apostles, and it's for everybody, and it's part of the new covenant. So James said, he who says commit adultery, which is God the Father, also said do not murder. Now if you do not commit adultery but you do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So, and you'll find this elsewhere also, that all 10 commandments are valid, and they are required, that it is New Testament for all mankind, for all Christianity worldwide. So if you transgress one, you transgress all 10, and then you are outside the requirement and the law and the love of God. If we look at James 4 and verse 1 to 3, and here he explains the sequence of sin, how it comes to the point where murder is committed. And James 4 verse 1 says, where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from the desires for pleasure that war in your members? You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. And then if you ask and you pray to God, then it says you ask and you do not receive because you ask amiss. We ask for the wrong things. It's not things that God agrees with. You ask amiss that you may spend it on your pleasures. You see, if you're hungry and you ask for food, that is a very good and valid thing, and God listens to you. But if you say, I want a better and bigger and faster car, don't expect that prayer to be answered. It's not going to happen unless you commit corruption and theft or whatever, and you do a crime and you do sin. So we see that, and that's the question and the problem why people end up transgressing the commandment. So if you transgress the commandment, you must ask yourself, how did I get here? There's a sequence of wrong thoughts, of wrong attitudes that have driven people and led them into that trap to actually commit that crime. So, and we need to get rid and prevent the spirit of murder even long ago. Now let's look at Romans 13 and verse 1, because there's a question about capital punishment. What about that? The death penalty, isn't that also prohibited? Let's look at Romans 13 and verse 1 to 6. The Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Rome, and he says, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. So it's good that we respect the authorities and the police. It says, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. So you see, God allows government, God allows the police. We should not come with our own ideas and go on crusades and riot and throw stones at police. Listen to the law, and as long as it's not asking you to transgress a commandment of God, then listen and live within the law of the land. In verse 2 it says, therefore whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works. Rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for your good. But if you do evil, then be afraid of the police. For he does not bear the sword in vain. Now he's talking about the centurion, but it can also be a policeman with a gun. So he doesn't bear the sword in vain. He may use it to maintain law and order, so don't go and riot and throw stones at police. So he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister and an avenger to execute wrath on him who practice evil. Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. So it says, for because of this you also pay taxes. So we pay taxes for the police force to protect us. And that's what they should do. But we shouldn't come with our own ideas of what's right and wrong. We should find out the law of the land, and we must accept that. So it's for this, because you also pay taxes, for they are God's minister, attending continually to this very thing. So accept the authorities and live within the law of the land as much as possible, as long as it doesn't expect you to break the commandments. So live accordingly. But if somebody has been found to have murdered somebody else, and there's overwhelming evidence without the shadow of a doubt that is the murderer, then the authorities have the right, as long as they are 100% sure and they can show it with beyond the shadow of a doubt, overwhelming evidence, especially if the person has a history of violence and the spirit of murder over time. And eventually it came to this point, then capital punishment is not prohibited. It is acceptable in the New Testament, but it needs to be due process and a careful testing of all evidence, and it should be overwhelming evidence. So, and then on the other hand, we can protect our family, and if it means causing harm in our homes, we can protect our family. So now you get the other side, where people will entice somebody into their home so that they can kill the person. That's also wrong. We should never have the spirit of murder. It shouldn't come to that. We should live peaceful lives in peace with everybody around us, and we should always seek peace. It's something that needs to be actively done. The way we talk with people, the way we live our lives, and our fairness. And so definitely we see that the 6 commandments is obviously also in the New Testament, and it's still valid for everyone, just like all the other commandments. But live in peace and watch your children. And this computer games and video games where people practice murder day and night, then expect problems. You know, if you shoot people daily on a computer game, it's going to be very easy to do it in real life. And if there's a gun lying around, then expect trouble. So we should not have the spirit of murder. And even we should have better and good computer games and video games. If the video game is about shooting up people, throw it away. We don't want murder to be around even in our heads and our minds. It shouldn't be that way. Thank you for listening, and I'm sure you can see obviously that commandment is valid in the New Testament. Without a shadow of a doubt, it's all over the place. Thank you for listening, and we look at the next commandment in the next video. Thank you for listening.